80 centimeters wide, 3 feet high, and no light except what he brings with him. Holding that light out in front is how a man gets shot in the face, so he holds it out to the side at arm's length instead and crawls, a telephone wire paying out through the dirt behind him. Ahead the passage turns, and around that turn there may be nothing, or there may be a man who has been waiting in the dark for 6 hours with a rifle already laid on the angle. He is carrying a pistol borrowed from a machine gunner, a knife and a flashlight. He is wearing boots, trousers and an undershirt. He is somewhere under Cuchi district, 25 miles northwest of Saigon, and the United States Army has no better tool for this job than him. The men who did it called the environment the Black Echo, and they called the work running the hole. Officially, the job did not exist. Certain formations produced more of them than others for reasons of geography. The 25th Infantry Division arrived in country in March 1966 and built its base camp at Cuchi, directly on top of the largest tunnel system in South Vietnam, a fact nobody established until afterwards. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, arrived in October 1965 and worked the neighboring Iron Triangle. Australian engineers arrived in September 1965 and pushed underground exploration further than the Americans initially did. The Australians also supplied the first name for it. They called the men tunnel ferrets. The Americans started with tunnel runners. What stuck came from the ranks rather than any headquarters. Tunnel rat, complete with an unofficial Latin motto translating roughly as "not worth a rat's ass," printed on homemade patches showing a rat with a pistol and a flashlight. It is not a slogan a staff officer invents. The 1st Infantry Division came closest to formalizing any of it. Having initially spread tunnel teams across its infantry battalions and concluded the results were poor, in 1967 it handed the entire tunnel exploration and destruction mission to its 1st Engineer Battalion, on the reasoning that demolition expertise was the one qualification that could not be improvised. That was the right call, and it is the nearest thing to a permanent tunnel rat organization the war produced. Elsewhere, teams stayed ad hoc, 2 to 6 men, most often 3, a supervisor and 2 explorers. Recruitment frequently amounted to an officer standing over a freshly discovered hole and asking who was going in. The reason anyone was asking that question at all comes down to a problem the army had no doctrine for. The Viet Cong began digging around Cuchi during the war against the French, cutting short escape tunnels and caches to evade sweeps. By 1965, the result was less a hiding place than a subterranean district. Post-war Vietnamese sources have claimed as much as 155 miles around Cuchi. American engineer assessments at the time were considerably more conservative, and nobody ever mapped the whole thing. What is not disputed is what was down there. Kitchens, sleeping chambers, aid stations, hospitals, repair shops, storage rooms, classrooms and command posts on as many as 3 levels, the deepest around 10 meters down. The design was more sophisticated than its improvised appearance suggested. Passages turned at sharp angles rather than running straight, which blocked blast propagation. Airlocks and waterlocks, sections deliberately flooded into a U-bend, sealed off gas. Trapdoors separated levels. Air vents were cut at an angle and camouflaged into termite mounds or under bamboo, and kitchens vented smoke through long horizontal flues that released it at ground level some distance away, where it looked like morning mist. Entrances were hidden inside an old truck tire in a village junk heap, beneath a stack of rice-drying mats, under a hinged tree stump, in a pig pen, in a cemetery, in a cultivated field, along a riverbank underwater. One documented entrance was concealed inside a false water well shaft, where the well doubled as a waterlock, and the passages were narrow on purpose, 2.5 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet high. The average Vietnamese man of the period stood between 5'1" and 5'4", and weighed around 115 pounds. The average American soldier was 5'8" and could weigh up to 180. The tunnels were built, in the most literal sense, to the wrong dimensions for the men who would have to enter them, which mattered enormously because the tunnels made search and destroy pointless. Free World forces would clear an area, declare it cleared, and move on. The Viet Cong would come back up and carry on. Worse, from a soldier's perspective, was knowing the enemy was sitting a few feet below your boots and was completely unreachable. Every technical solution failed or produced marginal results. Explosives placed in a discovered entrance collapsed a few meters of passage and left everything behind the first angle intact. Flooding failed because the clay drained. Scout dogs, one detachment attached to every infantry brigade, proved excellent at sniffing out entrances and could not be induced to go into one. Not ever, by anybody. Gas came closest. The tool was an agricultural pesticide duster marketed by Sears Roebuck and Company, the M106 Mitty Mite, a backpack sprayer with a 2-cycle petrol engine that weighed 25 pounds empty and displaced 450 cubic feet of air a minute for just over 30 minutes on a quart of fuel. Chemical troops in Vietnam also used them for their original purpose, spraying mosquito pesticide over fire bases. Sealed to a tunnel entrance with a poncho and duct tape, it pushed powdered CS through the system instead. Larger complexes needed more. By 1966-33, large-capacity tunnel flushers were in service with American, ARVN, and Korean forces. Machines heavy enough to be sling-loaded under a Huey. The first use of the technique was not American at all. In October 1965, in the Iron Triangle near Cuchi, the 8th Infantry Regiment of the 5th Arvin Infantry Division ran the first Mitty Mite tunnel operation with American advisors observing. It worked completely, and every Allied force in the country subsequently adopted it. The blower had a second function that mattered as much as the gas. Before the CS went in, colored smoke grenades were dropped, and the blower pushed smoke through the network. Wherever smoke seeped out of the ground, there was an entrance, a vent, or a firing port, and infantry spread across the area reported each plume. That was how Americans mapped a tunnel they could not see. If a system was too big for the smoke to reach the far end, the blower was moved to a further opening, and the process started again. Afterwards, the same machine was reversed to pump fresh air in and flush the CS out. Even at its best, it hit a wall. Airlocks, water locks, and trapdoors stopped propagation, and the Viet Cong built those features precisely because the Mitty Mite existed, and gas could never answer the question that actually mattered. It could deny a section of tunnel temporarily. It could not tell you what was in it, whether the enemy had left anything of value behind, or how far the system ran. To catch a rat, you set a rat. Someone had to go down and look. There is a further wrinkle that irritated McPhee considerably. When the extent of the tunnels finally became clear, the Americans discovered that ARVN had known about them for years. What ARVN had not established was the scale, and the reason was simple. They had never sent anyone down, having concluded it was suicidal. Over the next 4 years, that judgment would look increasingly defensible. The qualifications were informal and consistent. Physically small was first, and most units worked to a rule of thumb that anyone over 5'6" need not apply. Larger men did the job, but rarely well. Beyond size, they needed to be limber, strong, and capable of delicate work in a space where they could not turn around, since the job included probing, digging, forcing trapdoors, disarming booby traps, tying ropes to recovered material, and placing demolition charges. Immunity to claustrophobia was obvious and nowhere near sufficient. They had to be unbothered by prolonged crawling in absolute darkness, by bugs, snakes, and rodents, by the stench of the dead and of human waste, by choking smoke and residual CS, and by the prospect of hand-to-hand fighting in the worst conditions imaginable. They had to be willing to submerge and swim blind through a flooded waterlock on the assumption that a Viet Cong could hold his breath no longer than they could, and knowing that if it turned out to be a dead end, the way back was in reverse. The requirement that filtered hardest was acute hearing, which is a difficult thing to find in a combat army where a great many men have already damaged their ears. Underground, hearing is the sense that keeps a man alive. He needs to detect the faintest movement, which is also why earplugs were essential when weapons were fired and almost never worn. Some men tore the filters off cigarettes and jammed them in their ears when they expected a fight in the first few feet. There was no formal training course, and no unit ran one. Some engineer and chemical units gave informal orientation, mostly on operating the mitimite, and handed out diagrams of complexes to study. Everything else was learned on the job. A new man worked the surface support party first, then followed a lead rat, then eventually took the lead himself. There were support party men who never had the slightest intention of going into the Black Echo, and nobody made an issue of it. What did transfer was training the army had never designed for the purpose. Basic combat training put every soldier through the tear gas chamber, a cinder block room where trainees removed their masks on command and were made to recite name, rank and service number, or occasionally sing, to guarantee they stayed long enough to feel the full effect. The stated purpose was confidence in the M17 mask. The incidental benefit for a future tunnel rat was that he had already experienced CS in an enclosed space and knew he could function through it. Panicking in a dark, confined space full of tear gas is a very poor way to discover your own limits. Most went in bareheaded. A helmet costs vision and hearing and buys nothing worth having, where the main threat to your skull is bumping it. Many stripped off the fatigue shirt entirely, since cargo pockets and loose sleeves catch on obstructions, and those who kept it wore the sleeves down to protect the elbows. Knee pads and gloves existed and were divisive, since gloves make weapon handling awkward and collect sticky mud. Improvised knee pads were made from field dressings tied on with their own securing ties. Everyone doused themselves in insect repellent first against leeches, mosquitoes, spiders, scorpions, fleas, and ants. Photographic evidence suggests the typical tunnel rat went underground in boots, trousers, and an undershirt, carrying a flashlight and a .45 borrowed from whichever machine gunner was standing nearby. Most tunnel systems were not the sprawling multi-level cities of legend. Large complexes were rare. A great deal of the work was checking bunkers and short tunnels, often under 70 feet, and tunnel rats were sent to do it not because a bunker search is difficult, but because they were the men best prepared to handle booby traps. The larger complexes ran to a procedure. A village would be cordoned, with a reaction force standing by against a breakout or an outside counterattack. Villagers were questioned, scout dogs made the rounds, infantry probed under wood piles, manure heaps, discarded scrap and large earthenware pots. Sometimes a Kit Carson scout, a defected Viet Cong serving under the government's open arms program, would identify the entrances outright, then shout down them, offering the occupants a choice between surrender and being grenaded or buried alive. Men came up with their hands raised, occasionally grinning. Then the tunnel rat's job started, because surrender told you nothing about what was still down there. The entry shaft was grenaded, or a small charge dropped in to neutralize anyone waiting and detonate traps. If the complex looked worth the effort, the Mighty team arrived, and the smoke, gas and ventilation sequence took up to 2 hours before anyone descended. Fresh air might be pumped in continuously once the team was under, though as often as not they asked for the blowers to be switched off. They needed to hear. Then a man went in, and the procedure was this. Crawl with the pistol ready and the flashlight in the other hand. One hand and one knee at a time. Scan floor, walls and ceiling for tripwires, texture changes, seams, or small piles of crumbled dirt, indicating a trapdoor overhead or a vent. Moving air on the skin means a vent nearby. 2 angle changes and you are in total darkness. The backup man followed with the compass and the telephone, calling azimuth changes and estimated distances to the surface party, who plotted the course on paper. Not precisely accurate, but close enough for a general picture, and turns were usually only 1 to 10 meters apart, short enough to judge by eye. Anything of interest went up the wire: side rooms and their contents, airlocks, water locks, other shafts, vents. If the surface party found another entrance, they opened it and moved the phone line there, which gave the backup man less wire to drag. That mattered. After 100 feet, the wire caught on everything. The 2 men swapped positions periodically when they could squeeze past each other. It was exhausting work, demanding every sense at once, and if a tunnel ran beyond 300 feet, exploration was often called off. There was neither time nor manpower, and a complex that large was usually blasted shut instead. Booby traps were the defining hazard, though not quite as popular accounts have it. The Viet Cong used them less than is generally assumed, and for practical reasons, explosives stored long-term in a dusty or wet tunnel become unreliable. Emplacing them takes time, and the people most likely to trigger one are your own. Deep inside a complex, they were rare because the complex was somebody's home. Near entrances and side rooms, they were common. The most frequent design was the simplest. A grenade in a can, pin already pulled, the can holding the arming lever down, a wire attached. Pull the wire. The grenade slides out, the lever flies, and the fuse burns 4 to 5 seconds on an American grenade and as little as 3.2 on a Soviet or Chinese one. That is not enough time for a man on his hands and knees to get clear, and the overpressure funnels down the passage further than he can move. Even reaching cover around a sharp angle would not save him, and the traps were not placed near cover anyway. The one mitigating factor was that tripwires are relatively easy to spot in a flashlight beam. The other standing hazard was the punji pit, bamboo stakes smeared with excrement to cause infection, set at a side room entrance so an intruder puts a hand or knee straight into it. One experienced tunnel rat found one exactly that way, with 2 barbed stakes driven through the palm of his hand. They had to be cut off before he could be moved, after which 2 men dragged him out on a folded poncho, alternating on the job. On the surface came morphine and an antibiotic drip, standard for punji wounds. Standard practice on finding a trap deep in a complex was not to disarm it. It was to leave it and withdraw, on the reasoning that a neutralized trap may be a decoy for a second one a few feet on. Tunnel rats almost never set traps of their own. Too slow, too dangerous to install, too little gained. The doctrine on contact runs against the mythology and deserves stating plainly. If a team heard movement deep in a complex, the correct response was to back out fast, and doing so was not considered cowardice. There was nothing to be gained from a blinding, ear-shattering shootout at a few yards in a passage where a man cannot dodge. Killing 1 or 2 of the enemy was not worth it. Pressing on to explore more tunnel was not worth it. Getting killed for either was close to certain, with fire directed down a narrow passage. Most units prohibited officers from entering tunnels at all, which meant nobody was behind a man second-guessing his judgment about when to come out. Shouting "pull me out" carried no stigma. The man in the hole was the only one who could assess what he was dealing with, and a man could panic without warning, no matter how many times he had run the hole before. Only he knew when he needed a new line of work. Some took a break and went back to it. What came up was frequently worth the trip. Chinese made 57mm recoilless rifles with crated ammunition, which had to be worked out inch by inch because every projection dug into the tunnel wall. Mosin-Nagant carbines. Browning automatic rifles of American manufacture, presumably captured from the French or from Ardennes. Soviet machine guns. An 82mm mortar. Rucksacks with documents inside, always pulled out first because of their intelligence value. Sacks of rice in 50-kilo bags, recovered under a program redistributing captured food to government-controlled villages, and heavy enough that one team reported only 2 bags when there were 4, on the entirely reasonable grounds that dragging them around corners was murder. Less amusing discoveries were routine. Sealed US ammunition cans, opened hopefully by a novice, turning out to have served as chamber pots. Bodies. In one documented case, a team working a large Cuchi complex found half a dozen, several days dead, in a side tunnel, and was ordered to bring them up. They objected, pointing out that corpses in a tunnel are an obvious place to hide a booby trap. The order stood because confirmation of the body count mattered more to some commanders than others. They shared it out, 2 each, smeared Vicks vapor rub under their noses because masks do nothing for smell, and tied ropes around ankles. The first body would not clear the corners, so a man had to crawl back in and pull the rope from around the bend, half expecting a blast. It was remarked at the time, by more than one of them, that this was precisely the method by which their own bodies would come out. The demolition work that closed a complex was equally methodical, and it is where the engineer training paid off. Surface parties pre-cut detonating cord to lengths based on measurements that tunnel rats had relayed by telephone, dragged satchel charges to designated points, linked them with girth hitches, and ran electrical firing wire 100 feet back to a ditch. Entire 46-pound cases of C4 were dragged in and emplaced at key points when the objective was collapse rather than damage. The lead tunnel rat came out last, having double-checked every tie in the det cord himself. Fire in the hole was shouted 3 times before the handle was twisted on the blasting machine, which everyone called the Hellbox. 3 simultaneous satchel charges produced a dull thump felt through the ground. A large cloud of red dust from the entrance, and dust puffing from vents and a second entrance some distance away, which was often the first confirmation of how far the system actually ran. There was also a standing risk that hidden ammunition stores would sympathetically detonate, with results the men described as impressive. Whether anyone was still inside was rarely established. Frequently the answer was probably yes, and they got out through a connecting passage or a bunker at the village edge. Casualty figures for tunnel rats are genuinely contested, and the reason is bureaucratic rather than historical. With no occupational specialty and no units, a man killed underground was recorded as a casualty of his parent unit, and no central accounting exists. Veterans organizations and post-war research suggest a casualty rate above 1/3 among the men who did it regularly. Contemporary assessments took a markedly different view, holding that weighed against the inherent danger of the job, tunnel rat casualties were surprisingly light. Both can be true. The men who ran the hole repeatedly were at extraordinary risk. There were never many of them, and a great many soldiers went down once or twice, found nothing, and never did it again. Men did die in hand-to-hand fights below ground, from booby traps, from suffocation, and from drowning. Non-fatal injury was dominated by blast trauma, hearing loss, and respiratory damage. Tunnel rats absorbed far more CS and smoke than other soldiers, though the evidence for long-term harm from CS specifically is thin. The clearer risk came from an unglamorous source, the zinc compound in the white smoke pots pumped into tunnels, associated with late-onset pulmonary fibrosis. Post-traumatic stress disorder is common among former tunnel rats, though probably at no greater rate than among other Vietnam combat veterans. Valor awards were regular, most often the Army Commendation Medal for Valor and the Bronze Star for Valor. What that setting cannot convey is that the tunnel rats were never sent down to win anything. They went to answer a question that could not be answered any other way. What is down there, and how far does it go? The army that sent them held no illusions about what the exercise could accomplish, and neither, for the most part, did the men who volunteered. Their own motto told them exactly what the institution reckoned their work was worth. They printed it on a patch and wore it anyway.